Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson, here in beautiful Montreal with another installment of our cross-border playbook series. And joining us today from down the street this time around from Annapolis, Maryland, is Bill Cates. Bill is known as the original referral coach. He's spent over 30 years helping professionals move past pushing and pleading to build predictable systems for exponential growth, and shows the way to how to ask for referrals without pushing or begging. This episode is brought to you by Fractional Pros Canada, the home of Canada's fractional executive community. It's the place where over 1,300 Canadian fractional executives gather to connect, share, learn, and that magic word, Bill, refer. Learn more at fractionalproscanada.ca and join us today. A shout out to Nancy McKay for putting you on my radar, Bill, and bringing us together. There you go with the little thumbs up. Your regular thumb doesn't work. Is that the problem here?
No. I just have a little fun. That's all right. You know, we got a thumbs down if we need it here too. So,
all right. Well, this is going to be a great educational session. A lot of businesses are, I think probably all businesses are built on referrals to some degree. And particularly when you're working as a solopreneur / fractional, referrals are very often really the lifeline of your business. And that's what makes you or breaks you. And I am constantly preaching to fractionals, both those who are just getting into the fractional business and those who have been running for a few years. I get the question every week for sure, at least a few times, which is, what is the best way for me to fill my sales pipeline to make sure that I have business after, the clients that I have now are, I've done my mandate and we move on from them. And my answer is always the best source of business for fractionals is other fractionals, which means referrals. And so you need to build up relationships with other fractionals to get referred by other fractionals. So Bill, you've got a method called the VIPS, or I guess we call it the VIPS method for asking for referrals. You've been doing this for a couple of decades now. And before we get into the mechanics of it, give us the origin story of this. What was this born out of? Was this born out of your own struggle to ask for referrals and you had that magic entrepreneurial moment? There must be a better way.
Well, actually, it's a relevant question in the sense that a lot of times folks in our position, we often teach what we need to learn ourselves. So it's, in this particular case, not quite. What happened is many years ago, I was in the kind of the sales training, prospecting, marketing business. I had sold a couple of businesses. I owned 2 book publishing companies and I sold them. And I was looking for the what's next. And I knew that in this new business of mine, I needed to narrow my expertise, narrow my focus. And so I actually read a book by someone around the referral process, and I go, oh, this is pretty good, but, I'd say it this way, and I do it this way. And so it just triggered. And within about a year, I said, all right, I'm going to write this book on referrals and how to get more referrals. And this was the first book came out in '96, so this was even before, or just as the internet was kind of getting going, and I've been at it ever since. And just real quick, the referral process, if you will, is built on a very important principle, and it's the principle of borrowed trust. That's what allows referrals and recommendations and introductions to work. You borrow the trust in one relationship long enough to earn your own trust in a new relationship. Everything gets easier. And speaking of the internet, before the internet, before the telephone, before the telegraph, when someone wanted to do business in another town, they would bring a letter of introduction, borrowed trust. And so everything we're going to talk about here today is built on that and the belief that your value is worth sharing. That's the first mindset that you need to think about. Do you believe your value is worth sharing? I suspect most people listening do believe that. And that's where all this is coming from. It's coming from, who's next to receive this great value. So that's kind of a little setup to where we're headed today.
All right, nice. And yeah, before we get to the meat of it,
Yes.
I also noticed that you have not just kind of a process to follow, which is a great theory, but then in practice, you also figured out that there's going to be parts during this process that the person who's asking for the referral is going to be at a bit of a loss for words. Like, well, what do I say now? What do I say to that? And so you also developed a word track with what to say at different moments to keep the conversation moving in the right direction. And I'm curious, how did you realize that, professionals were going to need this word track as well? Did that happen after you'd built out the theory, or as you were building the theory, you were conscious of from firsthand experience, I better put in a few key phrases here for what people are going to need to say when they start getting into the actual practice of this?
Yeah, so I guess the word tracks, and it's good that you call them word tracks and not necessarily scripts, because I'm not expecting anyone to memorize the scripts per se. Some do, some like the words, but it really is a template for how you're going to find your own words. I read a book called The Language of Referrals, which is extremely tactical. When we get to word tracks, scripts, now we're talking very tactical here. And here's what I found. I found that a lot of people liked what I said. They liked the way I was saying. Say, oh, I never thought about saying it that way, or I like the way you say it that way. And so I realized that some folks really need a starting point, right? They need a sense of how it might sound, so they can buy into the strategy. So, for instance, the strategy of asking for introductions intimidates a lot of people. A lot of people are not sure. They don't want to, as you mentioned in the run up, they don't look like they're begging or pleading or unsuccessful or pushy, right? And so that strategy is often lost to people because they're not sure how to do it, what to do. So when I give them word tracks, I say, try saying it this way or think about saying it this way. They go, oh, I never thought of it that way. Then all of a sudden, that strategy that wasn't available to them is now available. So working together with principles, strategies, and tactics, all three are very important. Hopefully we move the needle for people.
And the other question that I think a lot of people have is, so, okay, there's this great process that we're going to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a process that we can start right away? Like if I've just met you for the first time at a networking event, whether in person or on a Zoom call, can I start with this right away? Or do I need to first have like a call with you to kind of break the ice and then set up another call where I'm going to get into asking for the referrals?
Yeah, probably the latter. You have to be careful about coming on too strong too quickly with this. Now, if we're talking about, if you're a fractional CFO and someone else is a fractional CMO, and there's a possible link, well, you might be able to explore opportunities right away if it seems like a good match. But here's the important principle at hand that needs to be attended to first. We're becoming referable when values delivered and values recognized. All right. So if I meet you for the first time and you get a really clear sense of the value that I provide, and I give you a couple of examples, and you can think of someone, oh, they should know. Well, maybe that's there. So when we're talking about clients providing us with referrals, the client experiences the value. Now, if we're talking about others, strategic alliances, partnerships, they may not experience the value firsthand, but they certainly have to understand the value. They have to appreciate and understand. Usually it takes a couple of conversations, if not more, to start to become very referable with someone else. And a lot of it depends on personalities, right? Some people will run with it pretty quickly. Others, they want to be a little more careful. So that's a long answer to your simple question.
And let's talk about rejection as well. A lot of people have a fear of rejection, and that's what holds a lot of people back from asking for a referral or asking
Sure.
anybody for anything, really, is
Right.
this inherent fear of, if I get rejected, there's still this primal caveman brain that is so afraid of that because it interprets it as the tribe is rejecting me, and I'm going to be living out in the forest by myself, and I'm going to starve and die, and I'm going to lose connection to all human activity in life and social meaning. So obviously that's not what actually happens, but talk
Right.
to us a little bit about what kind of mindset do we need to have going into this as far
Yeah,
as
sure.
that rejection, which is ultimately going to happen. We're going to get some no's.
We are in life in general. I mean, if you're afraid of rejection, then you probably shouldn't be in your own business. Now, with that said, it shows up in different ways, right? Some people don't mind making recommendations and asking someone to become a client. Is this a good match, right? They don't mind if someone says no. Some people, resist that. Sometimes it's just in the referral space where there's that hesitancy on someone else's part. So the bottom line is we have to become comfortable with that happening. And we have to, number one, not take it too personally. They're not necessarily rejecting us. They may be rejecting the fact that they don't really know our value yet, right? That's not fully demonstrated. They may just be very awkward around giving referrals, making connections. Like a lot of people don't like to make introductions. They're afraid that something might go wrong. And so that's playing, and that has really nothing to do with you. So the key with the objections and resistance, and this, by the way, this works in all aspects of our life, what I'm about to say, personal, business, except for with teenagers, because there's nothing, when it comes to teenagers, a good solid reasoning won't aggravate further. But with that said, what we want to do when we get any kind of resistance is to explore, to understand the resistance. If someone's hesitant to do something, I understand not everybody's comfortable with this sort of thing. Can you tell me more? It could be as simple as, can you tell me more? And you learn a little bit about what's happened. And sometimes you can reframe their thinking. Sometimes you can show them how you would reach out to a friend or a colleague, and they'll feel okay with that. And sometimes you have to back off, but you want a little bit of a formula, a little bit of a methodology, so you're not afraid of it. So you don't not ask because you're afraid of someone not wanting to go there, if that makes sense. Look, if you ask, they can say no. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. So your choice.
As the great Wayne Gretzky used to say, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
That is correct.
Yeah. All right, so let's break this down. So VIPS VIPs. So we start off with the V, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, stands for discuss the value they recognize. So explain that to us. What's the philosophy behind starting here? And what does a value check-in actually sound like?
Yep. So V is value discussion, discuss value check-in, any of that value is the V. Now, I already said that you're becoming referable when value has been delivered and value has been recognized. So how do we know it's been recognized? Well, two main ways. First of all, we're hearing value recognizing statements all the time. You, me, everyone listening. Our clients are saying, hey, thank you for this. Thank you for that. You really fixed it. Always feel better after we talk. All the various nice things that our clients say to us. So those are value recognizing statements. Let's pay attention to those. Some of those are quote unquote leverageable, meaning it could be a starting point to ask for possible introductions. It could be just as simple as promoting the possibilities. Someone says, hey, this is great. We love working with you. That's great. I'm glad you see the value in what we're doing. Please don't keep the work I do a secret, right? Don't keep me a secret. Share the experience. Never too busy to see if I can be a resource for others. These are ways to kind of foreshadow the possible introduction and encourage it. Now, the value discussion is probably, of all the things that I've been teaching for over 30 years, this is the most important, because this is what gets our prospects and clients to really internalize and understand and get clear on the value. And that's important. And what I've learned here, I've been doing a little looking into neuroscience and how it affects this process I've been teaching forever. And I've learned that when we get our clients to speak out loud the value that they feel they're receiving from a meeting, from our overall work, they get clear on the value just by speaking it orally. and it starts to rewire the brain a little bit. It gives them the tools, the language to how they might talk about us to others. So getting them to speak it out is very powerful. And important distinction here, we're not fishing for compliments. So don't think you're just trying to do yourself a service and say, oh, am I doing okay? Oh, yeah, I feel better. No, the purpose of this is to help our clients really get clear and experience the value that we're providing. And they usually get it, in some sense, they feel it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing business with us. But when they speak it out, it becomes much clearer for them, much stronger for them. That's good for them, right? And then that becomes a leverageable moment. So it could be, let's say someone decides to work with you. They decide to become a client. Robert, I think you made a great decision here, and I think we're going to do some great work together. And I know you had a lot of options, a lot of things you were considering. I'm curious what tipped the scales, what made you decide to move forward. And so curious is a good word here. It's kind of a good probe word, soft. We're getting them to reinforce their decision, not a bad thing. We're learning about how they processed what we teach, what we delivered, the value up to that point. And then we're strengthening their belief in the value, all of that. And then we can decide, is this a good moment? And it could be a good moment. When someone makes a buying decision to move forward with you, that could be an opportunity to suggest other people they might be able to introduce you to. If you're doing just kind of a review meeting, a timeout, and you say, let's talk about, let's put aside things we can't control, the economy and the market and all that stuff. Let's talk a little bit about what we can, which is our communication, our overall working relationship. First of all, is there any place we're not meeting expectations that we should be aware of? Anything not working that we should know about? Once you're into the relationship, you got to do these checks from time to time. You got to make sure expectations are matching, because if you don't, some things could be festering. They could be unhappy with something. And if you give them permission to bring it up in a safe place, they'll vent it, they'll get it out. Maybe it's fixable, maybe it's not, but it no longer has a charge in the relationship. And the principle at hand here is that a relationship that's had a problem that's been handled well is a stronger relationship than one that's never had a problem. I think we'd all agree with that. So we got to make sure, are we where we need to be? And then I'll tell you, if you do this, most of your clients are going to go straight to what's working. Right? They're going to say, oh, no, we love working with you. And you say, all right, tell me more. Well, let's make sure I keep doing what's working for you. Have a little smile on your face with this. Most of the time, you won't hear anything negative, but every now and then you got something to clean up a little, which is important work, good work. So that's the essence of the value check-in, the value discussion. Some people call it an expectations check. I recommend, by the way, that you work it into your agenda. And even when you're at the beginning of the meeting, if you're explaining the agenda, or even before the meeting, you're letting them know you're working on an agenda, that you are going to be checking in. So they kind of come prepared. They know it's coming. And if there is a problem, they're ready to share it with you rather than being caught off guard. So that's the V in the VIPS. That alone will make a huge difference for your relationships with your clients. And sometimes it triggers unsolicited referrals and introductions.
Now, that's if I'm asking for referral for a client, which makes a lot of sense. Let's take that and put it into, I am a fractional CMO. I am meeting a fractional CFO for the first time.
Right.
And I think this particular fractional CFO, I've checked them out on LinkedIn. I know what kind of work they do. They work in the same space as me. I see them as a very rich potential referral partner. How do I prove value to somebody like that who I've never worked with? They've never worked with me. Where do we go with it in that case?
Yeah, great question. And a couple of things. First of all, the folks that I found that do the best with these kind of partnerships, centers of influence, strategic partners, they will take the time, and sometimes it's over a couple different lunches or a couple different meetings, and each party will lay out their whole process. Here's what it looks like from soup to nuts, from the minute I meet someone and they become a client and ongoing. What does that whole value prop look like? And so the other person at least gets an intellectual understanding. And then the second part of that is the stories or the case studies or the examples. Using the words, find yourself using the words for example. and bring it to life, because you may explain it in a kind of a logical, linear fashion, and that's good. But it's really when people see how people have used your knowledge and your experience and your consultative skills, uh, how it turns up in real life. That's where you start to really become um, referable. That's that borrowed trust at work now. These examples, case studies. That's kind of a form of borrowed trust, because people can start to see what it looks like, and they're starting to trust your process. So. Um, in most cases, it takes a little time to develop that with someone, so they're going to really feel comfortable introducing you. So take that time, build that relationship. Now, once you've done that, where does the value discussion come into play? Well, you really, I could say to you, Robert, I could say, now you've got a sense of my process. I've given you a few examples. Tell me the value you perceive in what I do? Can you see how this might play out with some of your clients? Can we chat about that a little bit? Right. So I'm trying to get you to try on the value a little bit, thinking about your clients. It's a very soft, just kind of a brainstorming, collaboration conversation. So someone gets in touch with the value as best they can without having actually experienced it firsthand.
Okay, so this sounds a lot like a process I've actually gone through with a few fractionals. First meeting is 15-minute, very casual, and then it's like, let's set up another 45 minutes.
Yes.
Where we will each take some time to explain what our process looks like. So in my case, I walk them through the 6 fundamentals of marketing process that I use with your CMO framework. Then I also brought in a few case studies of examples of how I implemented this in different scenarios with different clients. Then it was over to the other fractional, do the same. And then after about 30 minutes of that, we both had a good sense of the value that we can bring to other clients. So that's kind of the proxy for value I'm bringing to you, is demonstrating value that I can bring to somebody if you were to refer them to me, which gives you a more of a comfort level of where my value is.
Yeah, a couple things. I agree. You got it. You got it. It's one of the principles here is protection, meaning if you're going to introduce me to someone, you're in a protection mode, meaning you want to protect your relationship with whomever you're introducing me to. So that's important, right? We got to know, what is it going to look like as best we can determine. Now, a real quick thing about case studies, keep your case studies, especially if you're in a conversation on a Zoom or in person over breaking bread together, keep them pretty short. I like to think about 1 minute, right? Here is a client, and here is the challenge when I met them, and here's the work we did. Here's what we put into place. We did this, we did that. And here's the result, and here's how they feel about it. The emotional part too is important. How did the client feel when they came with this challenge? How they feel now? Now, that little 1 minute case study could turn into a longer conversation. You could say, tell me more about that. What did you do exactly? How to, but you want to keep it as short as you can on your side to begin with. Also, these little 1 minute case studies, this is a great way to stay in touch with these alliances that you're forming. Just whether it's once a month or once a quarter. Here's another case study. Here's another example. Just letting these people know. So sometimes that'll help them trigger someone that might be in a similar circumstance. For some folks, it's not like they have a ton of opportunity to introduce you right on the spot, right? You have to stay in touch a little bit over time. And so these case studies is a great way to do it, because it really keeps the value forefront, and it shows these alliances, these centers of influence, also how you really care about the work you do and how you care about your clients and doing the right thing for them, which is also a very important part of this process.
Okay, so we've established the value.
Yep.
Next up is the I, which is treat the request with importance. You suggest a very specific line. I have an important question to ask you.
Yes. So why do we treat it with importance? Well, 2 reasons. Number one, you believe in the work. You believe your values we're sharing. You believe that if they introduce you to folks, there's a good chance you could be of service and help them. All right. So it deserves to be treated with importance. The other part of why we do this is because how you put it out there, right? How the words, the confidence behind my words, the energy, all of that will determine how you respond to this, right? If I'm kind of weak and wishy-washy and I say, "Oh, you don't happen to know anyone, do you?" No, I didn't think so. Okay, forget we had this conversation. Uh, th- they're not going to treat it with importance either. So one simple way is to say, "Hey, I'm glad to see the value. I'm glad that you're recognizing the value of the work we do. I've got an important question to ask you. I was hoping then we're moving in. That's the transition moving into the next phase, which we'll get to in a second. I have an important question to ask you. I was hoping we could brainstorm a little bit and see, right? And we'll get there. So that's one way. Just your energy, your demeanor, that treats it with importance. Um, one of the things I like to do is earlier on in the relationship, I like to talk a little bit about my why my emotional connection to my value, the mission that I'm on, why I believe in my value. I think that has a place in our conversation. I mean, our client's why is most important, but our why is a part of the conversation. And so part of the why is I believe in my value and I'm on a mission to reach more people with this important work. And so you can bring that back. You can do a callback in this VIPS and say, when we first got together, I mentioned how I'm kind of on a mission to reach folks with this important work. I just love this work and I believe I bring great value. So I was hoping we could brainstorm a little bit to see if we can identify a few folks, right? So there's a lot of ways to treat it with importance. The key, if you don't say any of those words that I gave you, just bring a level of confidence and reverence to this process, so they will get that and they will see that.
Yeah, I think it's really important because I know that myself as a fractional talking to another fractional, if I use the exact words, I have an important question to ask you. If somebody asks me that in that scenario, my guard is going up. I'm like, where are we going with this? That sounds very formal. And a lot of the conversations that fractionals have between ourselves is more casual. It's professional, but it's more casual. And so I think it's important to note that we don't necessarily have to use those words.
Correct.
So that it doesn't put up those automatic, defense mechanisms. But like you said, just make sure that energy is there and keep it low friction. Is there any other way you can think of phrasing that might not use that same exact phrase? I have an important question to ask you that would not trigger that defense mechanism as much.
Well, first of all, I think that you're right. In some people, it could trigger a defense. In other people, in other situations, people could actually lean into it. So they go, "Oh, right." So, but with that said, I mean, if it doesn't feel right to you, Robert, then you definitely shouldn't use it. Right? Number one, you probably wouldn't anyway. Number two, if you did, it would feel awkward. Right? So there's all kinds of reasons why you shouldn't use something, even if it can work. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And my philosophy is if it's legal, ethical, moral, and people get served, give it a try. So I think the best thing really is to just bring the right energy. Right? You don't even have to say anything. Sometimes people like a transition between the V and the P. It's, I'm glad you're seeing the value in the work we're doing. I'm glad I've got a happy client, or I'm glad you feel comfortable about about the value that I bring to other folks. I was hoping we could brainstorm a little bit, right? Just be present. That will treat it with importance. So let's not get too hung up on the I. Just don't be weak, wishy-washy, apologetic. That's the key. A lot of people get a kind of apologetic. They get too soft, and then they don't get as sometimes it actually gets confusing to the other person because you've gotten so soft around this.
Kind of like a mixed messaging. I'm
It
trying
can
to
be.
convey this
Yep.
is important, but I'm apologizing for it.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, I'm glad you're seeing the value. I'm wondering, you don't happen to know anyone else do you think should experience the value that I bring, or some such words? It's just the energy. Um, and remember, we're not pleading and we're not pushing, right? It's a balance. We're not doing this to someone. Asking for referrals or introductions is not something we do to someone. It's something we do with them, with their buy-in, their cooperation, and we also don't want to look unsuccessful. right? This is coming from a place of strength. It's coming from a place of success. It's coming from a place of knowing our value as we're sharing. And in the value discussion, we just heard them articulate the value that they've experienced. So we're only bringing this conversation forward with people who are feeling good about our value, right? So we're not doing this with people who aren't sure about our value yet. That would be awkward.
All right, let's get to the next step. So the P
Yes.
is get permission to brainstorm. You've called this the most important of the 4 steps. So talk to us about why brainstorming framing is such a game changer and how it works.
Yeah. So most of us involved in this conversation right now, Robert, people listening, watching, have experienced this. You don't happen to know anyone else who should know about the work I do, or can you think of anyone else who should be aware of the work we do, or who else do you think should know about this? A general throw up in the whole universe, right? And so the P and the S feed into this. What we want to do here is we want to make it a collaborative event. We're not just throwing it to them and seeing what their response is. We're coming with permission. That's buy-in. We've got to make sure they feel okay with this conversation. That takes the push away. And permission to brainstorm. Now, you don't have to use the word brainstorm. You could use the word explore, think about, put our heads together, any variation of that. But the dynamic we're trying to create is a collaborative approach. So as I'm glad to see the value in the work we're doing. I was hoping we could put our heads together for a minute, see if we can identify a few folks that you think should at least be aware of the work we do, aware of the value that I bring. I've got a few ideas I'd love to run by you. Now I'm going to the S, suggest names and categories. I have a few ideas I'd love to run by you, see what you think. So we can get more to the S in a minute. But we're getting buy-in. Now, sometimes when I'm teaching this in my seminars and coaching, they'll say, well, aren't you giving them a chance to say no? Correct. I am giving them a chance to say no, because if they've had bad experiences, if they're not ready yet, if it's not in their nature to make introductions, whatever's going on for them, we can't plow ahead with something that isn't going to work for them. So we're testing the waters a little bit to see if they're okay with this conversation. I believe that this is a series of very small permissions, very small yeses. First of all, it's permission or buy-in to, can we have the conversation? Can we talk a little bit about, who might also value this important work? So that's what the P, permission to explore, permission to brainstorm is.
And though the P stands for permission, how important is it to actually use the word permission in the question, in that word track?
It's not critical. It's, in fact, I could say, I was hoping, I was hoping with your permission, we could do a little exploring, do a little thinking. I could say that. Or I could say, I'm glad to see the value. I was hoping we could just put our heads together, hoping we could do a little brainstorming. So I don't have to use the word permission, right? I have a few ideas I'd love to run by you. What do you think? Can I make a couple suggestions? Oh, well, yeah, okay. Who do you have in mind? Right. So no, we don't have to use the word permission.
Okay. Good to know. And what happens now if I'm a fractional, I'm talking to a client, and the client gives you permission, but then immediately they shut you down and say something like, I'm happy to help, but I'm not sure I know anyone. What do you do with that?
So you heard me in the getting permission foreshadowing the fact that I've come prepared. This is also very important, because let me give you the principle behind this. First of all, I'll teach the principles, because when you know the principles, you can kind of figure it out from there. The principle is that if we throw up in the whole universe, if I say, can you think of anyone, or do you know anyone who should, right? It usually fizzles. It usually doesn't go anywhere. And so we're trying to get this person that we're talking to picture one or more people in their mind's eye, to visualize that person. And when we do that, then they're more likely to bring forth the name, and we can have a little conversation and see if it makes sense to get introduced to them. So we're actually at a time when you might think you want to expand the field and say, they must know somebody. We're actually going to be more effective when we narrow it. And so we want to let them know we've come prepared. If we let our client know that we've come prepared with a few possibilities, people we know they know, or some categories of folks we do great work for, then we're less likely to get that specific objection that you put forward, which is, well, I don't think I know anybody, because you're coming prepared with a couple ideas. And so you're getting permission to just have the conversation. I'm letting you know I've got a couple ideas. That sometimes can create some curiosity. So I could say, I was hoping we could put our heads together just for a few minutes, see if we can identify a few. There's a few specific people I know you know. I was hoping we could just chat, see if it makes sense, assuming, we come up with an approach that feels comfortable, that you might be open to an introduction. Can we chat about that a little bit? So it's a mixture of proactivity and softness at the same time. We're getting a series of little yeses. But if I say people you've mentioned in past meetings or people I know you know, that's going to create some curiosity. And we want that because we want to open it up. Again, I'm not going to push into anything you don't want to do, but I want to gain permission, if you will, to have this little bit of brainstorming go on.
All right, so let's talk about that preparedness step. That's the S, stands for suggest names and categories.
Correct.
So you talk about specific names and trigger categories. So give us an idea. How do we build this call to hit list? This target list. What is this researching people on LinkedIn and looking at their connections who are of interest, or something else? How does that work?
Yeah, LinkedIn used to be a method of choice for a lot of people, but LinkedIn is tough. It's cumbersome to go through someone's profile and connections and recommendation and try to figure out who they know and do they know them well. Because we're connected to a lot of people on LinkedIn. We barely know even who they are, right?
Yeah.
So LinkedIn is a very very cumbersome way to do that. Enter AI. So now I could say, ChatGPT or Perplexity or whoever I'm using, I say, Robert Mendelsohn is a client of mine. He owns this business. So especially if it's a name that could be somewhat common, if there's more than one Robert Mendelsohn, right? I give a little more detail. I could give the website, could give whatever, and say, I would like you to find all the publicly available information of who Robert knows. I'm considering asking him for introductions to those people. Who does he know? How does he know them? Give me some information. And it might ask you a couple questions, and then it's going to give you a list. And it's going to tell me that you interviewed so-and-so on your podcast, or you were interviewed by someone on a podcast, or this is a past client, or AI is going to give me that information. So that's one way to come prepared. A couple other ways to come prepared. First of all, just to pay attention. If it's with clients, to get to know your clients and where did they work before and how they get their business started and are they part of their industry trade association, and just being genuinely curious about our clients and our strategic partners can sometimes trigger specific people we know they know. And the other is either trigger events or categories. So it depends. Everyone's business is different. I work with a lot of financial advisors, so let me just use that. For financial advisors, some of these categories are people that have money in motion, right? Somebody sold a business, or a salesperson had a big bonus at the end of the year, or it could be, a death in the family, an inheritance, right? These are trigger events, trigger things that would where a financial advisor, a financial planner could be a great resource for that person. So each of us in our own businesses have to determine what are those trigger events, what are those categories, right? So if I'm a fractional CMO, what are other businesses going through that might trigger a need for me? And those are the categories, the ideas I'd bring to someone who might introduce me. If I'm a fractional CFO, some might overlap, and there'll probably be some different ones as well. So understanding what do people go through that triggers working with us. And usually that's the case, right? Most people who come to us, Robert, there's some trigger event, right? It could be an opportunity, it could be a problem, but there's something going on that triggers them, opens them up to entertaining a conversation with us. So identify those and then bring those to this conversation. And even if it doesn't turn into any introductions on the spot, as my strategic partner, I'm teaching you. how to be aware of people. So if someone does experience that, could be rapid growth, it could be depression in the industry, it could be anything, right? Whatever it is. Now that's in your awareness, and if it happens, then you might think of me because I've educated on how to notice the types of people that often value the work I do. Does that make sense?
Would that be useful, something to put into a follow-up, email, message, whatever it is, after this first round? Saying,
Yes.
great talking to you, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, here are things, if you hear somebody say the following, then that could potentially make them a good fit for me to be able to provide my value to
Right.
what they're doing and help them. Please, think of introducing us.
Yep. Right. Yes, you can. You can even do it beforehand. I talked earlier about promoting, encouraging. I could do this early in a relationship, and I could say, Robert, just let me give you a sense of the kinds of folks we serve the best, who we bring our best value, people, in some cases like yourself, or if it's a client. And so I could just be doing that as a way to plant the seed for a more robust conversation later. Or you're right, I could do it afterwards as a follow-up. And one more important point here. I'm not, let's say you're a strategic partner for me, right? I'm not necessarily asking you, in fact, I'm not asking you to sell someone else on me. I'm asking you to just encourage someone to have a conversation with me, right? If you're experiencing this, you should at least know about Bill, right? You should at least have a conversation with Bill. See if it makes sense to go any further, right? So, because I don't want you to feel like you have to make that sale because, first of all, you may not feel comfortable doing that. So if that's my expectation and you don't feel comfortable, you're not going to do it, right? We want to make, again, a series of permissions, a series of little easier yeses. I think you should at least talk to him, take a call, 15 minutes, just get to know each other a little bit, see if that makes sense. Oh, okay, I could do that, right? So it's an easier yes for the person to whom you're making the introduction. So
Yeah, I think it's really important nuance. You don't want the person to feel like they need to be recruiting for you or that they need to be selling you. All that they're doing is making the connection
yes,
and kind of lightly encouraging. I think it'd be worth a few minutes of your time
yep,
to connect with Bill. He may
yep,
be able to help you out with X.
yep. And there's a scale on that, right? You may meet somebody and you know what their situation is, you know what I do, and you may say, look, talk to him first, but I got a pretty good feeling this guy's got the answer, right? So that could be a little stronger, right? Or it could be, look, I know him a little. I don't know him super well. I get a sense of his value prop. I know he's got a lot of happy clients. Should probably at least have a conversation, right? So there's a degree of how strong, if you will, we want to make that sale. But don't feel like you have to make the sale. Your only sale, if you want to use that word at all, is selling the idea on a conversation. That's all we're trying. Take his call, take her call, visit with him for a few minutes. I'm sure you'll find a time, well invested.
Now, what are your tips for somebody working in a highly confidential space like M&As,
Yes.
turnarounds?
Yes.
They know that there's somebody who needs what you do, but they've signed all these confidentiality agreements. So how do they navigate that?
Yeah, you just be straightforward. A couple of things. First of all, especially if it's with a client, and if you're my client, I'm asking you, either early in the relationship or in the middle of the conversation, I can say, by the way, everything we do is confidential. They're never going to learn about your situation from me and vice versa. So we know that we're going to keep it as, fully confident. So sometimes a reminder of that can help. A lot of folks, the two obstacles actually that stop people from making introductions sometimes are one, confidentiality. They are concerned whether there's an NDA or not. They are concerned about that. So we always want to address that. And the other is that if they don't know what it's going to look like, what we talked before, if they don't know how you would handle it, how you might proceed, it's an unknown. It's then a perceived risk, and so they won't do it. Some will, but a lot of them won't. That'll hesitate. So that's why we always emphasize confidentiality all the time, whether there's NDAs involved or not. Always emphasize confidentiality. Now, sometimes you may learn kind of accidentally or just, with all great intentions, you may learn something that's a little confidential. You say, look, is he going to be okay with me knowing this? Right? Maybe I should let him bring. Yeah, yeah, you probably should. Yeah, probably, So sometimes just be very, very aware about that. Um, I like to learn as much as I can about my new prospect, the person to whom I'm being introduced, and I want to make sure it's things that they're going to be okay with me knowing. Right? It could be about personality, it could be about how the parties know each other, could be other research that I do using AI or going onto their website and all that, but I'm always wanting to research my prospect, but we don't wanna make it look like somebody told us something that should have been kept to themselves.
I noticed that one of the word tracks you suggest using is, if you were me, who would you not want to talk to? Some reverse psychology going on there. Talk to us about why you suggest that might be a good approach to use in
Yeah.
some cases.
So first of all, this is if you have a sense of humor, because this is meant to be a little fun. And in my book, The Language of Referrals, I teach about 11 of these different ways to have this kind of conversation. And so, for instance, let's say you're a client and you're a member of your industry trade association, and maybe you were used to be on a board of directors or you're the president, whatever, right? So I can get a list of other people on that the board of directors, and I just say, Robert, I've identified a few folks, actually, people on your board, similar businesses. I get a feeling. I did a little preliminary research that might be a good resource for them, probably at least worth a conversation. And I've got a list here. Let me give it to you. I'm just curious, if you were me, who would you avoid at all costs? And so the person's going to laugh, right? They're going to go, let me look at that, right? And they go, well, this guy, well, no, they're all pretty good people, right? Or they may say, no, don't talk to him. He's a jerk. He'll blow you off. So it's just a way to enter a little humor into the conversation. And whenever we can create humor in this conversation, everybody starts to feel more comfortable. So in my presentations, I give different examples. Is one professional in Baltimore, Art. He's a fun guy. And he says, yeah, we're just brainstorming here. I'm looking for about 100 people. And the clients go, 100 people? All right, please tell me you're kidding, right? Oh, yeah, I know. It's too many. How about 3 or 4? Oh, okay, that's more better, right? So now it's a little fun. It takes a little tension out of the conversation. There's a financial advisor in Omaha, Nebraska, perfect for a financial advisor to say, look, we're just brainstorm a little here. First and foremost, do you know any lottery winners? And they're gonna laugh, and they go, "Yeah, you would like to know some lottery winners, wouldn't you? I get it." And that was our retirement plan until we met you. But so it just eases the tension, has a little fun. So if you were me, who would you avoid at all costs? Just adds an element of fun. There's a serious way to do this too, though. I've seen people use what you call a hit list or a target list. I've identified some businesses in our area. I've identified some people in our area that I think I could be pretty. I'm just curious. Do you know anybody? Do you know any of these folks? Could we talk about a possible introduction? And they'll look at the list and they'll go yay or nay. So that is a tool that can be used in a fun way or a serious way.
So, Bill, in your experience, what's the single biggest unforced error that you see professionals making when they, finally work up the nerve to have this conversation, ask for the referral? Where does it go off the rails most often?
Other than not asking at all, or
Other than not asking at all, you force yourself, but you're not comfortable, and what happens, and how do you recover?
Yeah. So I think probably the biggest mistake that I found, well, two really. First of all, not having this value discussion, not checking in, not making sure that value is indeed being recognized. That's where everyone should start with this. I'm not expecting people to listen to this and necessarily all of a sudden go from not asking at all to asking. You might, some people do. step one is value discussion. Start checking in more often. Um, and these are open-ended questions. They're not, have you found today's meeting helpful, or are you finding our relationship valuable? It's not a yes or no question. It's let's talk about this, right? So that's important, because that's going to create stronger relationships. It's going to help you feel better about the next step. And then I would say the next step, and they usually come together, would be the promoting the possibility. Don't keep me a secret. Never too busy to see if I can be a resource for others. Share the experience. Lots of different ways I teach on how to promote and to do that. And then you start to kind of work your way up to the possibility of an ask. Start with your love list. Start with people who love you. You all have some clients or other folks that just, right, start there. That's a path of least resistance. Or people who've already given you referrals. They've made introductions. Maybe you didn't ask, maybe you did, but you can always go back to them. Some people will have fun and kind of blame it on me and say, hey, I just read this book, or I just heard this guy talk about how to get more introductions, and it gave me some ideas. Can I try it out on you? Oh yeah, what did he say? So you can have some fun with that. And then after that, the biggest mistake that people make is not coming prepared. And whenever I'm doing coaching calls with folks, sometimes with a group, uh, if people are asking but not getting, if it's fizzling, then usually they didn't come prepared in any way. They didn't have a couple of specific folks or a few categories or trigger events to do. So that's kind of one of the things um, that will create a challenge around the asking. And look, you got to make sure that you're referable. You got to make sure that you're remarkable equals worthy of remark, right? You got to make sure that you're creating strong, great relationships with clients. And there's two parts of a relationship with clients, and also strategic alliances, partners. There's kind of two parts. There's the value connection. Are they understanding our value? If they've experienced it, do they appreciate it? Right. So the value part of what we do. And then there's also the personal connection side. That's also very important. They like us. They trust us. They feel comfortable with us. Both of those always have to be together for someone to decide to work with us, and even more so for someone to refer or introduce us. We can achieve a level of client satisfaction and client loyalty having not yet gotten to that point where people have become advocates for us, where they really want to advocate for our value. And so that relationship and the strength of that relationship is just key. And look, we've talked a lot about asking, and I believe in asking, and there's a lot you can do prior to that. Become more remarkable, become worthy of remark, have these value discussions, even if you don't ask. There's a lot of things you can do where you don't have to necessarily ask, and you're still going to create some opportunity for yourself. So don't feel like it has to be only the ask or nothing. You can work your way up to that over time.
Kind of make yourself so good that they can't help but notice, and then organically, people are going to start referring you or asking you, what kind of people do you help? It's just the conversation is going to kind of roll a little bit more organically in that way.
Yeah, we should all be getting unsolicited referrals, right? You, me, everyone listening. If we're not, there's something missing. So I when I get calls for folks to help with coaching, often they'll, not all the time, but they're, a few times a year, they'll say, my clients love me. I go, great. And I'm missing an opportunity. Great. So tell me, are you getting any unsolicited introductions? Are you getting some without even asking? Well, no, I've just not been. All right, let's go back to that my clients love me statement that you just gave me, right? So, yeah, we work on that, and all of it, that's a barometer of referability. That's a barometer of our value as we're sharing, that at least some people are doing it. And there are some people who will do that on their own. And so are we at least tapping into that? And let's have those value discussions with those people and find out what are they appreciating. So maybe that's something we want to emphasize with everybody that we didn't think about. So we get a lot of research with these value discussions. We learn how people are perceiving our value. And sometimes we think we provided value here, but they're actually getting value over there that we didn't even realize that was important. And so it expands how we can talk about our value to bring more people into our business. So these value check-ins are huge, not just in getting referrals, but in to help us learn how to do what we do and do it even better.
All right, Bill, some great tips on the VIPs.
Thank you.
Let's wrap it up with the billboard question. If you could put a single message on a billboard for fractionals and business leaders to read and take into their lives every single day as they drive by it on the highway of life, what would you be putting on that billboard?
Yeah, I didn't know this question was coming, but I sign off a lot of my videos. I just recorded a video yesterday that's going on my YouTube channel eventually. And my little signature statement that I think kind of fits what you're asking here is, who will you be introduced to today?
Who will
Someone
you
wakes
be
up in the morning.
introduced to
Who am I
today?
going to be introduced to today? Right? It's in the awareness. And when it's in the awareness, we see opportunities that we might not have seen otherwise. And then my job is to come in and fill that with some strategies and tactics that you can use to actually take advantage of those opportunities that are in front of you probably almost every day.
I love it. Who will you be introduced to today? I mean, everybody's going to get introduced to somebody today.
In fact, I think for those watching the video, let me show it. I have it right there. Can you see that above my saying? Who will you be
right above
introduced?
there in the background? Yep.
Right up on that. Right.
There it is, in stone.
That's kind of my little signature statement, if you will, the billboard. Thank you.
Nice. All right, Bill, this has been awesome. Some great tactical tips, takeaways.
Very tactical.
To hopefully
today,
make it easier for everybody to go and start getting some referrals rolling. Thanks again so much, Bill, for joining us here on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast.
You bet. My pleasure, Greg. Here to serve.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.